Hi, I'm Dr. Mitch Harlan, and welcome to the Truth Talks podcast. Today's guest, let's call it this morning. We got up early this morning to come in to do this guest, MaryAnn Orr. MaryAnn, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. So, what we're going to do today is we're telling a story that it's your story, it's your personal story. And we always bring on stories to help somebody else identify something, give them an option of a way out of something. However, in this case, we're going to do a little bit of education too about what to look for. So I'm going to open this up with this is MaryAnn Orr, and she has a story where one day she went to bed perfectly fine, the next day she was not. Let's talk about your story, MaryAnn.
Great. Thanks. So I'm 32 years old at the time and just had my third child, super healthy, super normal, just living the dream. And I woke up one day and I wasn't feeling well. And the night prior to that, had kind of a weird night. And I woke up on a Saturday and nothing, everything just seemed a little weird. I didn't have an appetite. You know, I'm somebody that was really healthy, so I didn't really have a comparison. I've never broken a bone. I almost never get sick. And that whole day I just felt off. And, so the night progresses and my oldest son had a football game. And the whole team went to a restaurant in Denver, a local restaurant, and had a team dinner before this game. They were undefeated. I was the team photographer. I, was so excited. It's like a November night, it's cold. And the team leaves the restaurant to go warm up for the game. And I befriend a mom, and she happens to run into her friend. So just sitting there casually, with my lemon water, having a nice conversation with a couple new women that I had met. And they started talking in a language that clearly wasn't a real language. It sounded like Charlie Brown's teacher. And if anyone has had sisters, you probably pretended to speak a foreign language when you were little. And I thought, oh, that's so weird that they're doing that. And it sounded like wah, 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 wah. And as I'm sitting there trying to figure out and process what's happening, I'm sitting at the table like this, and the waiter comes over and taps my arm. And I look down, and it's my own hand tapping my arm. And I look down and I'm trying to process what's happening as I'm looking at my hand. And I recognize that it's my hand. I just don't have the attachment that it belongs to my body. And these women, so the language kind of comes back in, and it's almost like a dream scenario. It's like in a movie scene. And it's very hard to focus, but if I focus on one thing, I can comprehend what's happening, except what's happening to my body. And this woman says to me, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I don't think I am. I think I'm going to faint. I think something is happening." The kindness of these women who've never met me in their life, never laid eyes on me before this event, were so kind to me. And so they're like, "Well, let's go to the bathroom." So I'm trying to do all of the things that you do to try to shake whatever this is off. I go to splash water on my face, and the automatic faucet is hot. And so we let's go out and get some fresh air. It's November in Colorado, so it's 14 degrees. And I'm sitting outside and I'm like, I just don't know what's going on. This is just, I can't get right. I can't get better. So we're at the bar part of this restaurant to go outside. And we're sitting out there, and this poor woman is freezing, absolutely freezing with me, which I was like, I thought it was interesting. I couldn't feel the cold. It just, something wasn't relaying in my brain. And I'm like, I just thought I was going to be fine. Like any second, I was going to be able to brush this off and be fine. And I go to walk back to our table where we had been sitting, and I fell on a table of people eating their dinner. This is Saturday night at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night. and I fall on this table, and I happened to fall on a paramedic. And at that moment, I knew something was really not right with me. And I fell and I said, I think I'm having a stroke. And the man that I fell on said, I'm a paramedic and I think you're right. I think something is happening here. And of course, I'm devastated. I'm embarrassed. I look like I'm intoxicated, which of course I wasn't, and I was afraid they were going to kick me out of the restaurant. And I just kept saying, I'm not drinking. I'm not drunk. Something is happening to me.
I think something important to point out too is, when you're in your 30s, a lot of people, women don't, well, men or women, you don't think that's going to happen to you there. And there's something you said there that I want people to really understand. It can happen in your 30s. So there's a lot of people who would be embarrassed and then not say what's going on, right? And time is brain cells.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly right. So the manager of the restaurant comes over and they call 911. And, it's funny because I think women tend to do this for sure. We tend to feel like we need to make other people feel better. And so I was so embarrassed being in the middle of this packed restaurant, having this very public health event happening to me and not knowing what's happening, not sure what's happening, not ever having experienced something like this. And so the firemen, the first responders come in, and I don't want to be carried out on a gurney. And so they took me by my arms and just carried me out, like, like, like Weekend at Bernie's. And, and, I get into the ambulance, and I've never been a patient before. I've never had anything like this happen before. And the first ride to the hospital, it was very confusing. And I'm like, this is what inside of an ambulance looks like. So everything was happening to me, and it's very clear and concise, but it was also in slow motion. And they were asking me what drugs I'm taking. And I'm like, I took an Advil 2 weeks ago. I'm trying to think of like what I could possibly have done to contribute. And we get to the hospital, and I go into the ER, and I see this doctor, and I am like, oh, she looked like she just woke up. And, as I'm laying there in the hospital for what ended up being a total of 6 hours without treatment, actively having a stroke. And the best way I can describe what it feels like to be having a stroke, it's like drowning in your own body. And, you're just drowning, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And over the course of 6 hours, I'm in and out of consciousness. I am missing this football game that I realize is happening without me. And life is happening, and I'm languishing in this ER. And they're checking me for drugs, they're checking me for everything but stroke. And I was called in as a possible stroke patient, and it took them 6 hours to get a CAT scan, to give me a CAT scan. And as I'm coming in and out of consciousness, I definitely am having the left-sided weakness. Things are happening. But I finally say, like, look, I'm going to check out of this hospital. I'm missing this game. I'm missing life. I have 2 small kids at home. And everyone has had this experience where you've read a page in a book and you read it, but you didn't comprehend it, and you have to read it again. And so this doctor gives me this form to release myself, like against doctor's orders. And I couldn't comprehend what it was saying. And she said, well, I don't think you should leave if you can't comprehend this. And I said, well, why am I here if not, no treatment at all?
So I'm like blown away about this right now. How did that even take place in a hospital?
Well, here's why. Because I'm 32, I'm healthy, and I don't look like somebody who would be having a stroke. And because of that, I didn't get treated like somebody who had a stroke. And, they're looking for all of the usual things. So they're looking for, mental health. They're looking for drugs. They're looking for, they're mindset is a little bit different than, the protocol. So I get a CAT scan. They show that something is happening. And it took 2 more hours before they ordered me a CT scan, which is, or MRI. And they realize I'm having a stroke. And they immediately want me out of that hospital immediately. And they shipped me to a hospital called Swedish in Colorado, which is a 5-star. That's where you want to be if you're having, a serious complication or a serious illness. And it's a stroke hospital. It's a hospital that specializes in stroke. And at that point, I was mostly unconscious. I was more unconscious, drowning in my own body. And I remember being in the ambulance on the way from one hospital to Swedish. And I just remember the man in the ambulance calling somebody on a phone. They have phones in the ambulance, I guess, saying, "We're losing her. This is not a good situation." And the dramatic, "Stay with us, stay here." And of course it's emotional. It's like not my favorite to get emotional publicly, but I was unconscious, and I remember hearing this voice, "Wake up, wake up." And by the way, my youngest is a year old. So I have babies at home. And something was just waking me up out of this place that's not a dream. It was just a different place. And it was the neurosurgeon and the doctors and the team talking about the only option, because I was outside of a window that they could give me other options, was to have this procedure where they go from your groin to your brain to remove this blood clot. So what had happened was a blood clot formed somewhere in my body, which is very normal, traveled through what I now know is a hole in my heart called a PFO. 25, 1 in 4 people have this. It's a valve that when you're in utero is open, and the moment you take your first breath should close. And for 25% of the population, 1 in 4, that's a lot, it doesn't close. I never knew I had this. I never knew that I had it, but formed somewhere in my body, went through that hole in my heart, traveled up to my brain, and 25% of my brain, so a clot formed, had died behind that clot, and 25% of my brain was at risk. And the only procedure that was available at that point, long after, at that point, 7 hours after I had started having a stroke, was to, a device that goes up through your body to get the clot. So, I'm in the emergency room and I'm in ICU for a long time, as you can imagine. And I just couldn't comprehend how sick I was. And the team at Swedish is so remarkable. They immediately started therapy for me. So, flashcards. So one of the problems that I still have actually is, it's called aphasia. It's where you can't think of, like, you see a picture of a helicopter, but you don't know what it is. And I feel like everybody can understand this in some capacity. We've all gone into the kitchen to get something and forgot what it is. But for me, that information, it was like it didn't ever exist. So it's a deeper level, but I feel like everybody can kind of understand a little bit of that. And it's embarrassing, even though it shouldn't be. But it's scary. It's sad. I can't be somebody that's like injured. I have a 1-year-old. I have a 1 and 3 and 9, so like I can't be a sick mom. So I'm in the ICU, and one of my favorite nurses, which we're still friends to this day, I would take a tissue and drop it and try to catch it with this hand that just wants to sleep and be tucked in. And she was the perfect combination, and these nurses were fantastic. The perfect combination of, we respect the hustle, we appreciate that you're trying, but you also have to rest. And when you have a brain injury, sleep you just sleep and you're just so tired. Your body is so tired. Your brain is tired. And so, I wasn't able to care for myself. I had a full-time nanny. I had, high school friends that drove 40 minutes to be with me and sit with me. Friends that were in like the nursing profession. And I was very, very sick for a long time. And to this day, I'm still very affected. I don't see out of my left eye correctly. I don't hear out of my left ear. Everything on the left side of my body is affected. It's like everyone has had the feeling, the sensation of your arm falling asleep, that feeling of it waking up. That's permanent for me on the left side of my body. It's permanently waking up, but never awake. It's a bittersweet thing that you can't tell really that I've had a stroke and yet still very affected. And through this journey, it's been really interesting because, the American Heart Association reached out to me, and I'm not even sure how it happened, but they heard of my story and they asked me to testify at the state capitol on behalf of this legislation, which, changed the protocol for heart attack and stroke victims. And so basically what I learned through this process was ambulances will pass a hospital that's better suited for what's happening to go to a different hospital. And so now we passed this legislation. And so now we rule out stroke and heart attack for any age, for any gender, before we move into, is it drugs, is it whatever? And so we changed that protocol. And then at the time, the governor of Colorado at the time, John Hickenlooper, formed a board and appointed me to this board. And it was all of the top medical people. It was the best neurosurgeon, the best physical therapist, the best of everybody, and me as a professional stroke survivor. And we formulated, how do we help other people who are having a stroke or a heart attack have better outcomes? Because what I learned after the stroke was time is brain. If you get to the hospital, they can give you medication that will completely reverse and dissolve. So there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to do that. And so we addressed rural communities that, maybe are way out in the middle of nowhere. And the work that we did on that board ended up, at the time that I left the board, because I felt like I had, probably contributed the most I was able to contribute, 27 states had adopted our protocols that we created at the time that I left. And that was, easily 12 years ago. And so that makes you feel a little bit better, thinking that somebody somewhere else, maybe in a rural community, is going to get intervention that will save their life and save their quality of life as well. But it definitely, it's a humbling. I feel obviously sad that it happened to me, but grateful to be here. Just, and if you can do something to have somebody not have this outcome, because it's hard, being healthy in the first place saved me. That was a strong contributing factor. Ironically, sitting outside in 14-degree weather cooled my body down enough that it saved me. Women that, just out of the kindness of their heart saved me. The paramedics saved me.
One of the things that you and I talked about a little bit before, though, was kind of this whole thing about how you become a different person. Because in reality, you had to grow up really, really fast.
Well, right. And as a woman, we think of breast cancer as our risk factor. You're more likely as a woman to die of stroke than you are of breast cancer. And, I went to bed 32 and I woke up 90. And I was so sick for so long and so bedridden. My children were in preschool, and I would manage to get to the kitchen and prop myself up on a stool when they came home from school to act like I had been up all day. And because I did not want my kids to have a sick mom. And I think anyone who struggles with depression or illness, or I think there are a lot of people that have maybe not had a stroke per se, that understand like the things that we do to look like we're healthy, to act like we're healthy, and fake it till we make it. And I, and I say this very carefully because it is truly the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I mean, I almost died. Like, it's the worst thing. But the silver lining, I think, for me is, it really did cause me to have to look at my life and think I didn't have the energy to have the life that I had had at that time. And I say this very cautiously, very humbly. One of the silver linings of my story is that it allowed me to force me to let go of some of the things that we hold on to in our lives, that we wait until we're 90 to let go of: vanity, whatever, false impressions, all of that. And it really has allowed me to live a different life, and I think a better life. And I didn't need to have a stroke to be grateful for life. I didn't need to have this happen, but I think that, there's a reason that I probably will never understand beyond what I can think about. But, I care about telling my story, even though it's difficult, even though you can see 15 years later, it's still as fresh as it was the day after it happened. And, when you're laying in bed and you're sick, and your kid, you can hear your children playing outside, and you wonder, and I for sure did not think I was going to live to see the 1-year anniversary, because the statistics are so terrible. And when they come in from outside and they smell like dirt and grass and branches, and they're just little boys, that you have to fight. You have to fight. You have to rest when your body needs rest, and you have to fight every other second that your body isn't resting. And I had a lot of struggles. I had a nanny I had somebody that obviously I couldn't take care of myself, who drops me off at one of my therapy, so speech, occupational, physical therapy. I had to learn how to walk. I had to learn how to read. I had to learn, and I still struggle with a lot of cognitive problems, but, I couldn't, for example, read a recipe in a recipe book and then implement it. I still struggle with the reading and then implementing, or disorganized time. Like, I have a lot of deficits with that. So she drops me off. I go to a therapy appointment. She drops me off at this medical building, and I got lost in the elevator, and I didn't know, I was disoriented. And thankfully, well, I knew I was in trouble when the same person that I had seen got back on the elevator. Their appointment had ended and they were back on the elevator, and it was an older man. And I feel so grateful for the advice of one of my doctors, who said, you need to let people know that you have a brain injury because people can't tell. And I knew that I was lost, and I had no idea. Apparently I had been gone for an hour, just lost. And I walked into this medical office, and I was like, I have a brain injury and I'm lost. So they, of course we figured it out, and I made my way back home eventually. But you have to be honest about what's going on. And, and it's funny because I struggled a lot. So after the stroke, I would go to support groups, because like, who else has had a stroke at 32? And so that was a challenge, finding people who had similar stories. And, and I felt kind of almost ashamed because I didn't look necessarily like I had a stroke per se. And yet was still so affected. So I'm like, who am I to like seek out help, to seek out support, when when I don't look like I'm injured. And then as I got a little bit more distance between me and that event and the old me, the new me realized, like, you know what? There's a story there. That's a, like a diamond has many facets. I think a good story has many facets. And one of the facets is, for me, you never know. When you look at somebody, you never know what they're going through. Be kind, be gentle, walk softly, because people have their own stories. And whether it's someone had a stroke, somebody had a terrible childhood, somebody had, you never know what's going on in somebody's life. So that's why we should all be a little softer with each other.
A lot of times in life, we don't recognize what it's all about until we're forced to do it, or an event happens. But I tell you, I love the idea that you were willing to come on and share the show. We're going to actually post some stuff about what to look for stroke. We're going to talk. I'm going to post a couple things of what happens post stroke. A lot of people are like, "Oh, you didn't die, so everything must be good." Again, you have all these residual types of issues, but we really want to educate people on stroke. We want to educate people on what to look for stroke, and then really what to do. And in prevention, we don't talk enough about prevention. This is something that we want to help spread this word. It's very near and dear to me, obviously, since it just happened to my mother, who's had a very, very, very good recovery. We want to make people aware of what's going on. And believe it or not, as much money as we spend, people still don't know.
Yep, exactly right. And I think that, I for sure, I think being healthy and living a healthy lifestyle is going to help you avoid a lot of many different health issues that arise. And I think that's what I like about the American Heart Association. Their mission is to have people live healthier lives in the first place, which definitely was very helpful. You're going to avoid a lot of problems, not just stroke and heart attack, but you're going to avoid a lot of problems being healthy and active in the first place. And then it's going to help you with your recovery. And I think mindset is really vital. I think the mindset of, this is my personal Everest. I climbed Everest as far as I'm concerned. This is my own personal Everest. And it's a journey I didn't ask to be on. And again, very humbly recognize that, nothing is all good and nothing is all bad, but I do feel like, I live a different life today because I found some strength in me that I didn't know existed. But at the same time, I'm always going to be permanently affected. And as I get older, these deficits are going to, get stronger, and it's funny because as I was recovering, well-intended doctors said, well, where you are in 6 months, that's about where you're going to be. And then I hit the 6-month mark and I was a little bit better. And then they said, well, where you are in 18 months, that's about where you're going to be. And as I hit each of those milestones, I continued to get better. And I will tell you that cognitively, I am stronger today than I was 10 years ago. And so healing, especially when we're talking about the brain, it takes a very, very, very long time for your brain to heal. And if anybody has had a brain injury, whether it's, a car accident or stroke, whatever it is, just know, and one of the messages that I really am passionate about sharing is you can continue to get better. And, even 10 years later, I'm able to do things today that I wasn't able to do 10 years ago. That's how long the process is.
MaryAnn, thank you so much for coming on and telling this story. We're going to save some lives with this, and we'll post some stuff, some information and things when we run your story. But I appreciate you coming on, being vulnerable, and giving us a really powerful story.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate you. I appreciate that you have dedicated your life to allow people to share their stories. And I think that, the human experience is something that we probably don't talk about well enough. And I really appreciate the chance to share my story. And I hope that, somebody listening, of course, I hope this, helps somebody who unfortunately finds themselves having a stroke or a heart attack. But I also hope that, someone who, just, I hope it touches people that have had their own different experience from mine, but they can relate to a few of the things that I'm talking about. And so I really appreciate you and giving me the opportunity to share my story.
That's what we do this for. I guess we will end it with this. We will end with recognition. We want people to recognize what a stroke looks like. And then the second thing that we want to do is all the things that can be done post-stroke or pre-stroke to even prevent it. So again, we'll post that stuff. Thank you for your story. We'll be in contact.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.